On June 18, 2023, a submersible called Titan, which was run by the company Ocean Gate, went into international seas in the North Atlantic Ocean near Canada's Newfoundland. The submersible had 5 people on board, including the founder and CEO of Ocean Gate, Stockton Rush, who were on a tourist trip to see the wreckage of the RMS Titanic. They had enough air for about 3 days. The U.S. Coast Guard and Canada's Coast Guard tried very hard to save the people on board, but they weren't able to do so until early on June 22, when pieces of the ship's wrecks started to show up. This led to the sad conclusion that the ship sank and there were no survivors. As an engineer, I'm very angry about what happened and the different shortcuts that were made. All of that will be covered today. Let's figure out what went wrong and what we can learn from it. First, let's talk about what we already know about the company that runs the Titan Submarine. Ocean Gate Incorporated is a privately owned U.S. company based in Everett, Washington. It makes crewed submersibles for tourism, industry, and study and exploration. Stockton Rush Guillermo Solon started the company in 2009. Stockton Rush wanted to be an astronaut, so he got his commercial pilot license. However, he couldn't be a military pilot because he had bad eyesight. So he went from San Francisco to Seattle to work as a flight test engineer for the F-15 Eagle at McDonnell Douglas, after seeing Spaceship One take off in the Mojave Desert in 2004. He decided that he didn't want to be a tourist in space. He wanted to be like Captain Kirk on the Enterprise. He wanted to explore, so he changed his focus to exploring under the sea. He was married to Wendy Rush, who was a daughter of Isidore and Ida Strauss, who died when the Titanic sank. This is important to the story we're telling here today. Tragic things happened on a deep-sea tourist trip to look at the wreckage of the Titanic, which sank in 1912 in the Northern Atlantic. Before we get into the details of this tragedy, let's look at how hard it is to explore the deep sea in general. Because breaking free of gravity and flying through the air seemed like such a big deal, it was easy to be amazed by aviation and space research. But in many ways, it all comes down to pressure, whether it's a deep-sea craft or a much bigger engineering task. We don't think about air pressure because it's only 14.7 pounds per square inch at sea level where we are. This pressure is caused by the stream of air that goes all the way up above us and into space. This pressure comes from all the air molecules above us pushing down, but water is a much denser fluid than air. So, the pressure goes up by 1 atmosphere, 14.7 psi, for every 10 meters, 32.8 feet, you dive. About 12,500 feet below sea level, the Titanic is sitting on the ocean floor. After more than 100 years at the bottom of the ocean, the broken bow and stern of the ship are more than 2,600 feet apart and surrounded by trash. The wreckage is about 400 miles from the coast of Canada's Newfoundland. You can see here, so let's go deeper and wider into this. Imagine laying on your back with a 1 foot by 1 foot board. Now think about how heavy that board would feel at 100 meters, which is the length of a soccer or football field. We have a pressure of 10 atmospheres, which is equal to 145 psi. This means that on a 1 by 1 foot board, we would feel the weight of 20,880 pounds, which is 4.7 Tesla models. The Empire State Building in New York City is 381 meters, 1,250 feet tall. At this depth, the pressure would be 37.4 atmospheres, and a 1 by 1 foot board would feel as heavy as 80,000 pounds. At 490 meters, the U.S. Navy submarines in the C-class can dive as deep as they can go. Here we feel a pressure of 48.5 atmospheres, which is the same as a weight of 94,800 pounds on a 1 by 1 foot board. At 828 meters, which is the height of the Burj Khalifa, we'd feel a pressure of 2 atmospheres, which would be the same as a weight of 173,520 pounds on the board. Now this is about the same depth as the submarine that can dive the deepest. The remains of the Titanic is at a depth of 3,800 meters. The Oscar-class submarine of the Russian Navy is there. The pressure is 376 atmospheres, which means that if we put a 1 foot board on our chest, it would weigh 797,000 pounds. The ocean gate of the Titanic was ready for a mass dive to a depth of about 4,000 meters. Now, that may seem crazy, but it's not even the deepest people have gone. That record belongs to James Cameron and the Deep Sea Challenger, which was built in Australia in 2012. The Deep Sea Challenger went to the deepest part of the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean, which is the deepest point on Earth at 11,000 meters or 36,000 feet. Here, the pressure would be 1090 atmospheres, and that 1 foot by 1 foot board would have 2.3 million pounds of weight on it. Compared to the change in pressure at an airplane's cruising altitude of 36,000 feet or outside the pressure, might be 3 psi between 10 and 12 on the inside. This should help you understand why more people have been to space than to the deepest parts of our seas. Now let's talk about the warning signs that were there from the start with Ocean Gate. Also, Ocean Gate sounds like a controversy just waiting to happen. First, the Titan's shape means that 17 to 18 bolts must be used to hold the hatch shut from the outside. This means that the people inside the plane can't open the hatch. Instead, they'd have to wait for people on the ground to do it, and it's easy to see why. The water seals on these deep sea ships have to be very strong because they have to be very tight, and all of that is hard. But I think this shows why it's important to have backup systems and some kind of powerful detonation cord you can pull to blow the hatch if the ship came to the surface and no one found it. One of the early worries was that the ship could come to the surface somewhere in the Atlantic without being found, and the people inside could suffocate because they couldn't open the hatch and run out of air. The Titan also didn't have a GPS or other navigational tools, nor did it have a locator signal like an airplane's black box. Most of us use GPS to get around near the surface, but it doesn't work in deeper water. They use the ship's gyro compass, measured speed, and estimates of local ocean currents to figure out the ship's path. They also make it possible for inertial navigation systems, which use acceleration, deceleration, pitch, and roll from the computers that send this information to figure out where something is. The Titan, on the other hand, seemed to rely only on data from the surface support vessel. In 2019, O'Shagan wrote a blog post explaining why the Titan was not certified by any ship authority, which is a huge red flag. Ocean Gate said that most marine and aviation accidents are caused by operator error, not mechanical failure, and that classification focused only on the physical state of the vessel and not the actions of the company. I'm sorry, but that sounds like a sure thing to me. David Progg, a journalist who wrote about the Titan to see the Titanic in 2022, said that during his voyage, the surface support vessel lost track of the Titan for about 4 or 5 hours. He also said that adding a locator beacon was talked about at this time. Even though they didn't know where the sub was, they could still send it small messages. He says it was quiet and tense, and they turned off the ship's internet so no one could tweet. Oh my God, that's so scary, and they already knew this was a possibility. The craft was also managed by a video game controller, which makes me think of beanbag chairs and break rooms in Silicon Valley. But it is just plain stupid. Military spec goods go through a lot of testing, which makes them safe to use in any situation. For example, the Apple Vision Pro headset costs $3,500, which is pretty cheap compared to the F-35 fighter jet helmet, which cost $400,000 to make. And the reason why will be smaller volumes, of course, but also because they have to go through crazy vibration tests to make sure the welds will all hold up, to make sure that the higher levels of radiation at 40 to 50,000 feet won't hurt them in the long run, and to make sure they are absolutely reliable. Now let's talk about how we got to the Titan Ocean Gate. We bought Antiquities, a submarine, in 2012. This was our first chance to test and learn about this whole project. Next, they built Cyclops 1, which was done with the help of the Applied Physics Laboratory at the University of Washington. Even though this ship could go as deep as 500 meters, it was still nowhere near deep enough for the Titanic. But they had to do this next, and the next time they do it. In the first version, the hull was made of carbon fiber, and the whole submersible drove vertically, with seats that could turn to keep people standing up. Now it was said that Boeing worked on the basic design analysis with Ocean Gate and the University of Washington. Before we talk about that again in a minute, there's a bit more to that story. At last, they would get to the Titan, which would be the finished product and would be good for 4,000 meters. One of the most important things to know about the Titan is that it is made of carbon fiber and titanium. In the world of materials, this is a very strange thing. High-strength steel and aluminum have been used for a long time. We also have test methods and data from data engineering about how they fail and what to look for. But carbon fiber is still a very unusual material. In fact, it's likely that none of the cars you've ever driven had much carbon fiber in them. The only exceptions are really high buildings and supercars, as well as the Boeing Dreamliner, which is a newer plane. Before that, we always used aluminum, titanium, and other similar materials. So there's less known about it, and it's hard to make sure you get it right. On track with Spencer Composites in January 2017 for the carbon composite cylinder. This was the same company that built the composite pressure hull for Steve Fawcett's single-person deep flight rifle. After Fawcett died, Richard Branson's company, Virgin Oceanic, bought Deep Flight Challenger. The company had already announced plans to do 5 dives to the deepest parts of the ocean. But Deep Flight didn't agree with the plan because a ship was only made to dive once. This is a big deal. We'll talk about this again soon. In a statement, they said that the trouble is that the Deflect Challenger's strength does go down after each dive. Adam Wright, the company's president, said that it was best on the first dive. It was made to set a record, dive deep, and then be put on display in the Smithsonian. This is a very important part because a lot of engineering comes down to knowing the operational lifetime. This could have been a factor in this case. Also, I tried to go to oceangate.com to find out a little bit more. I looked at their website and saw that it was taken down on June 22. So when the Titan went missing in 2023, the University of Washington said that the Applied Physics Laboratory, APL, had nothing to do with designing, building, or testing the Titan submarine. A Boeing representative also said that the company did not work with anyone else on the Titan and did not plan or build it. A NASA spokesperson said that NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center had an agreement with OceanGate under the Space Act, but that neither its employees nor its buildings were used for testing or making things. Basically, it turns out that none of the partnerships they thought they had were actually partnerships. This is a classic case of a company trying to build its reputation by working with NASA. How does that sound to you? But no one really knows what exactly they did with NASA. It could have been as simple as saying, hey, can we use a little bit of space over in this corner of your building? This is probably the most frustrating thing for me as an engineer. In January 2018, David Lockridge, the Ocean Director of Marine Operations, filed a quality control report saying that no non-destructive testing, or NDI, of the carbon fiber hull had been done to check for voids or delamination in the carbon fiber lamp that could weaken the whole structure. NDI non-destructive research. Non-destructive testing, or MDT, is a way to make sure something is safe without breaking it apart, because really, the best way to see if something is safe is to cut it in half, break it, and say, yep, it's safe. But you have, of course, broken the goods, so MDT is something that engineers use all the time to make sure things are safe. In the world of carbon fiber, it's even harder because carbon fiber doesn't bend, give, or get holes and cracks like other materials do. It calls for a lot of knowledge and understanding. Lockridge was told that OSHA would rely on the real-time acoustic monitoring system, which he didn't think would give the team enough time to safely stop the mission and evacuate if something went wrong. This was the day after he filed his report. He was called to a meeting where he was told that the plastic window you look out of was only rated for 1,300 meters because OceanGate would not pay for the design of a window rated for 4,000 meters. When they met, he said again that he was worried and asked if he would refuse to let crew testing happen without a big scam. Because of this, Lockridge was fired from his job. In June, OceanGate filed a lawsuit against Lockridge, charging him of sharing proprietary trade secrets without permission and making things up to get rid of him. In November 2018, a deal was made to end the case. I'm sure everything was kept secret, and we'll never know what was decided. But that is really, really scary. During a human-powered fall on December 10, 2018, Stockton Rush used the vertical thrusters to deal with unexpected positive buoyancy when going down past 10,000 feet. The air inside these submersibles is like a balloon, right? So they have a hard time diving. So they have different ways to do this and different ballast methods. But for some reason, he had to use vertical rockets to keep going down after about 10,000 feet. And when this happened, it messed up the way the blades talked to each other, messed up the way the water behind the propellers moved, and messed up everything else. They were out of touch for an hour. Now Russia was proud to say that, after James Cameron, he was the second person to dive alone to 13,000 feet. But if that were me, I'd be scared to death. I would come back and find out what happened with the comps. What should we do? Can we change how often it comes on? Can we get a backup system? Can we find out what needs to happen to make sure that doesn't happen again? And we know what happened again because of that reporter's story. After these tests were done in January 2020, the whole Titan started to show signs of cyclical fatigue, so the craft was sent to 3,000 meters. Now the hull has been fixed up and given a new rating. For 4,000 meters of diving depth, it's impossible to know who did it and if everything was done right. I decided to make this video because I think we're on the verge of a new age of exotic tourism and exploration. Whether it's going to the moon, low Earth orbit, or deep sea diving, wealthy people like the ones involved in this incident are always looking for the next big thing. So if we're going to do this, we need to be aware of how dangerous it can be. There are no regulatory boards involved here, unlike in business aviation. Since this is international water, the company didn't have to register the main ship that takes people from Canada, right? So it had to be written down. But there aren't many rules about what happens out in open water. As an engineer, I love drive, so this story is really hard for me to read. I mean, it sounds cool to make your own boat out of carbon fiber that is 5 inches thick. But as an engineer, I also know how important rules and safety steps are. Aviation is a great example. If you've ever been on an airplane, you can't imagine how safe you are because so many people are involved, from company workers, like those at Boeing and Airbus, to engineering test officials, to the FAA, and other regulatory approval bodies that make sure everything is regulated and controlled. None of that is happening here. One of the first things you might notice about a ship implosion is that the people probably didn't have to go through much pain. They probably just died right away. We talked about how heavy you'd feel at these depths, and you probably just get crushed. So it's likely that what they did was build a ship that was pretty amazing on its own. This was a unique ship with a carbon fiber layup, a composite frame, and titanium. It also had a window where you could see the Titanic. Before, people couldn't do any of these things. But the problem is that every craft, ship, and engineering gadget has a limited amount of time that it can be used. Now, engineers do this by trying something to see how many times it can be used before problems start to show up, and then they add a safety factor. For instance, your car will work for almost as long as you do. There isn't any pressure. At sea level, it's just the pressure of the air, right? Now, rust and other things could make things different, but your car is fine. What about planes? Planes are pressurized and depressurized, pressurized to pressurized pressure. Right, and you can't really expect to know everything there is to know. So what engineers figured out is that if we're going to build this out of aluminum or carbon fiber, we have to do a test every 1,000 hours, 500 hours, or whatever the case might be, a complete overhaul, where with a tear down the wall panels and inspect, and they'll actually get out and check for any cracks and other impurities and imperfections, because any crack or little divot can be a stress concentration point where it'll start to impound and fail. Then finally, they'll say that after this many hours, say 20,000 straight hours, the plane is done, but that doesn't mean it's going to fall apart. But we know that nothing bad will happen in this window because we've tested it for millions of hours. And that is the working time. There's a good chance that a plane could fly for a lot longer after that. But that's not what we want to do. That's how long the system will work. They didn't do NDIS or MDTs, which are non-destructive tests to see what was happening to the carbon fiber, to find out how long the Titan could be used. Again, carbon fiber is a mesh that is put down in different patterns and then stuck together. It is very amazing as a building material because it is so strong, but it hasn't been studied as much. We've been working with high-strength steel, aluminum, and other materials for 100 years, but this is something new. That's why it's so important to talk about this. It's exciting to go to new places. Air travel is sexy and exciting, and we're on the verge of space tourism, where rich people can buy a ticket to go up and tour around the moon, have a nice catered lunch, and then go back home. When there are new borders, there are new things to learn, which is what makes them frontiers. There is no set plan. And when you have to build ships that can stand up to the pressure of the seas and deep, deep water, there is a lot you don't know. Because of this, there are no commercial copies of this. I think this vessel just had a crack or a flaw that made it look funny. Over a couple of rounds, something was going on. I mean, they did go down and come back up 3 times, but the 4th time, it all fell apart. Sincerely, I don't think any ship that goes to the Mariana Trench or 12,000 feet down in the Atlantic should last more than a couple of trips, and I think they were trying to make these tickets cheap. I think Stockton Rush was trying to do this. At the moment, they began at $125,000. When these guys went on at $250, right, it was double that. At $250,000, this sounds like a lot of money, but the real price probably should have been $1.5 million, which would have let you change the vessel every once in a while or do full-scale testing to replace parts. There are a lot of things that must take place, but I think they took shortcuts and did things they don't understand because they were trying to be cheap, be on the ship themselves, have a good reputation, build a brand, and build a business. And I'll be honest with you, we know more about space than we do about the deep sea or the deep earth. These places are just really, really hard to reach. This is very sad. We all know that I was an optimist. I was hoping that we would find them and that this would all be a lesson without anyone dying. That's not how things turned out. But when it comes to engineering, we always have to learn from our mistakes. If you think freedom is important, you should know that these people took a chance. They were good at what they did. I agree with you on that. I believe in freedom and letting people take their own risks. Choices. But did they really know what this boat was? Was everything known? Did they really know what the risks were? Most likely not. So we can try to get better at those things. And maybe the next time someone comes up with the idea to explore the deep ocean, there will be better ways to do it, but it will be much more expensive. Okay, I guess that's a look. If you thought this was a crazy story, I'm Alicia, and until next week, check out this one.